Hello and welcome back to Big Discussions. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. I am the owner of this channel and I am the founder of the Big Words blog site. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The information for my blog and all of my social media info are on the banner for this channel. And I just want to thank everyone who has subscribed thus far, who has shared my content, who have commented on my content. I really appreciate that. I'm still a young YouTuber. I've only had this going since January of this year. It's been a lot of fun so far. Let's see. So today is June 16th. And it's Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. This video is actually a follow-up or a part two to the last video, which was entitled Growing Up Without My Father in Our Home. That video was inspired by a woman named Miss Burdine off of the social media platform Black Enough, which was started by Dr. Boyce Watkins as an alternative to Facebook, just in case Facebook gets shut down by the government or broken up by the government. Another concern was that Facebook was starting to censor free speech by certain individuals. So, I'm digressing. So, well, first of all, that last video, it was very well received. It went kind of long. That was the longest video I ever made, and one of the first people to share it on Facebook was my brother, and my brother's a stickler for length. So when I was taping it and I was letting it go, I was thinking, okay, this video is way too long, but he approved of it because I think every minute was used in a meaningful and valuable way, and it held his attention. So I want to thank him first of all for all his contributions to all my creative endeavors, and then I want to thank everyone who watched that video and who enjoyed that video and who commented on that video, because it's a very important topic, and such that I decided to come back and record some follow-up thoughts. For both these videos, I didn't want to make the title, even though they were created leading up to Father's Day, I didn't want to make the title Father's Day so that they would be evergreen, quote-unquote evergreen, and that people might stumble upon these throughout the year and look at them. So there we are. So, after I taped the video, I, of course, thought of some follow-up points or maybe some things that I wanted to elaborate on, and that's what this video is going to be. I don't know that it's going to go 40 minutes, and my intention is actually to go shorter, as I have some other things to do on the list for today. Let's see. So, fatherhood, father, sons, manhood, masculinity. One of the things I think about when I think about those areas is the opening scene of the movie 300, starring Gerard Butler and Lena Headey, and I think David Wenham is in that movie as well. It's a fictional portrayal of the Spartans and the Battle of the Thermopylae Pass. And the first one was better than the second one, but powerful movie, lots of action, lots of violence, but there's some deeper messages in the movie, and the opening scene really stands out to me, and it's something I think about frequently. And in the opening sequence of the movie, it shows King Leonidas being born, and then it's being shown how he was being groomed to be a Spartan. I mean, obviously he went on to become the king, but they showed how he was being groomed by his father to be a Spartan. So he had to learn combat. He had to learn how to take a punch. He had to learn how to get hit. He had to learn how to have that fighter spirit. And then I think the Spartans, they sent their boys out into the wild so that they would learn how to hunt, and they would learn how to struggle in nature, and they would learn how to defend themselves against the numerous wild beasts out in nature. And if they were able to come back after a certain amount of time, they would become Spartans. And if they didn't come back, they didn't come back. Only the strong were able to become Spartans. So that was always a very powerful sequence to me, but particularly the part where his father, or whoever that was, taught him the ways of the Spartan warriors. And I think at the end, what they did was they showed his mentor tapping on the shield, and so you could hear the boom, boom, and you could see little Leonidas sitting there and just kind of nodding his head like, I understand. I get it. And so I'm saying that to say that in my last video I talked about it's not just enough having a male there, but you want the right male, imparting wisdom, imparting knowledge, and that's the ideal situation. You want the right male there, and the right teacher. So I want to say just two more things about what my father did as I get into this. My father's father, my grandfather. You know what? Before I go into that, there was something else I wanted to say. If you notice, I'm holding up a football. I've been playing with football since this video started. And in the last video, I talked about my uncles and the fact that other men can fill in those roles or fill in those pieces that your father either didn't or couldn't. And one more story about my uncles, and I might have said this in the last video, I don't remember, but all my uncles, well, actually 4 out of the 5, were very much into sports. And when they would come around during holidays, whether it was during the football season or during the Final Four or the NBA Finals, these guys really knew their sports, and they talked sports, and these guys were sports gurus. Some were betting on the games, and some knew the rules cold turkey. Some of them just knew sports. And when I look back, as I said, football is something that we got a late exposure to. And because we were, for the most part, under our mother's tutelage, I remember most of my childhood walking around the house hearing her say, football is a barbaric sport. Football is a barbaric sport. Football is a barbaric sport. And I took that on and started believing that as well. It is a violent game. It can be. There's a lot of contact. And my story is we didn't really start getting into the sport until my best friend got his Nintendo, and he got a copy of the game Tecmo Bowl. And that was actually my first real exposure to football, because there were no men who were around who were into football consistently. We didn't know that there were a whole bunch of little leagues around Buffalo, and so there were actually a lot of boys out learning how to play football in Buffalo at an early age. But because there wasn't anyone in our ecosystem to explain the game and take us out there and talk to us about getting hit and delivering hits, we had no exposure to it. I tried to. I was a basketball player in high school, and one year I tried to go out for the football team, but I wasn't used to wearing a helmet. I wasn't used to playing in the elements, and I wasn't used to getting hit and giving hits, so I didn't last very long. And I think my brother attempted to walk on at the university at Buffalo, and he had a roster spot. I just think that with everything else, holding down a job and keeping his grades up, it was just a lot. And athletics is a lifestyle, and if you haven't been playing that sport for a while in your life, it can be difficult to take it on later on in life. So early exposure is better. So that's why one of the reasons why I brought up my uncles in the last video, and I brought up my father's love for baseball, and that's because exposure is key, and getting exposure to these things early is important. And if there's no one in your ecosystem to expose you to these things, you're probably not going to take those things on in a significant way. In any case, so my father, probably the most important thing that he did was that even though he and my mother split up, he made himself visible. And my grandfather, who I never met, told my father to always make sure your children know who you are. So even if you're in another city or another state, make sure your children know who you are. That's very simple advice. That's very simple guidance, but it's very powerful and important guidance. And Dad did that. And as I got older, I realized that I've had a lot of peers who didn't know who their fathers were, or they knew who their fathers were, and their fathers didn't do a lot for them. And they also found out they had siblings across town that they didn't know until later on, and they may have had siblings in other states. So that's a very important piece, to make sure your children know who you are. Some of my fondest memories are Dad picking us up on the train, or at least sending us train tickets so we could go out and see him. I always loved taking the train. And I remember going back to the opening sequence of 300, a precious moment I remember is Dad teaching me how to tie my tie. And I remember asking him, Dad, can you show me how to do this? And that was really a big deal for me, because it was the father-son transfer of knowledge thing. One of the things I thought about after the last video was the fact that there are no guarantees. So we like to think that if there's a man around and if there's a father around, everything's going to be rosy and everything's going to be peachy. And at the end of that video, I talked about Michael Jordan and his father. And that's why I'm wearing this Wheaties shirt, by the way. This was sitting in my closet, and I was actually going to wear a polo shirt, but I was a Michael Jordan fan in starting in middle school. Never owned a pair of Jordans, by the way, but I was caught up in the Michael Jordan wave, and so I religiously ate my Wheaties every morning, just like you said. You better eat your Wheaties. So in Come Fly With Me 1990, that was a documentary about the first part of Michael Jordan's career and his ascent to stardom. And one of the things they pointed out in that video was the what's the word I'm looking for? They romanticized the relationship between Michael and James Jordan. And there's no way for us to know if their father-son relationship was actually like that. But in the media, you could see that they had an affectionate father-son relationship, such that James Jordan seemed to be Michael's biggest fan, and James was always following Michael around to all of his games. And I always fantasized about that and thought that it would be cool to have a father-son relationship like that. But the reality is that not every father-son relationship is like that. And there are a lot of instances where the father-son relationship is pretty toxic for any number of reasons. So I just, wanted to point that out, that not every father-son relationship is like that. And even in the best circumstances, nothing is perfect. There are instances where the father is present and is doing the best that he could do, but by nature the child is, or the son is, rebellious. And I've seen that happen quite a few times. I saw that happen growing up in Buffalo. And that goes back to nature versus nurture. You might have the guidance and the teaching and the mentoring right there, but the child by nature might not listen, and they might just have to go their own way. Some people are just like that. So you have instances where the father's not a positive role model, or the father doesn't know how to express love to his child or his children. And then you have instances where the children don't listen. So there are no guarantees. An example of that is the Debarge family. And I know we have to be careful with celebrity families, but when I watched the documentary about the Debarge family, they did not have a safe home, and it was in large part because while they were very talented musically and they blew up for a little while and they made a lot of hits, their father was very abusive, and that took a toll on the majority of those children well into adulthood. So I'm pretty big on masculinity as it relates to fatherhood and boys and how they're raised. And I do believe, and based upon some of the response I got in the first video, that there are things that are best transferred from a man to a boy. So again, even if the biological father is not there for whatever reason, whether he was killed off or he was just negligent, there are a lot of things that can be learned from other men. So a boy can have multiple fathers, multiple mentors, and that's been the case for me. I've had multiple fathers, and I've learned lots of things from other men. The mentor I described in my very first video on my channel, I've learned a lot from him, but as it relates to women, and maybe I shouldn't give this away, but one of the very significant chivalrous things I saw him do was to put the woman's coat on after dinner. And I think you probably remove the coat as well, particularly when you're in the Northeast and it's cold outside and you have to put on heavy coats. A real G move is putting on a woman's coat after dinner and then taking it off when you get to the restaurant and making sure she's comfortable. Me and my father never talked about that. I never saw my father talk about that. My mother might have mentioned it, but it's powerful. It was powerful when I saw a man that I looked up to do it. And likewise, I started doing it. Let's see. Masculinity. And an important part of masculinity, which I didn't pick up on being raised in a matriarchy, was learning how to take charge and learning how to happen to situations as opposed to letting situations happen to me. And there are numerous examples for this, but I'm going to go back to my prom story. I'm going to steal a page from Mamiya Obsidian Ali of Obsidian Radio, who usually brings up his prom story. So I'm going to try to be brief with this. But my senior prom was the only one of the two that I went to. It was one of the worst nights of my life for numerous reasons. But the girl I asked to go, I asked her early in the year. And I didn't really know if she would say yes, but I said, okay, well, I'm going to ask her anyway. You know, I was a shy kid, unsure of myself. And I said, I'm going to ask this female anyway. So I called her private line. Back in the day, that was a big deal. She had a phone in her room, and we didn't have cell phones back in the early 90s. So I called this person, left a voicemail, and in the voicemail said, I'd like to go to the prom with you. Let me know if you'd like to go as well. So here I am thinking, for some reason, I'm thinking she'd call me back with an answer, yes or no. She never called me back. And then when we got to school, she seemed to avoid me. And I remember we had AP biology together. And so we're sitting, I'm sitting across from her and another young lady. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, she didn't call me back. She didn't say anything in the hallways when I saw her. And she seems to be avoiding me. And so partway through the class, I hear her whisper to the other girl, guess what Anwar did? And so now I'm kind of like, she's talking about me. But she hasn't come to me and said anything. She hasn't said yes or no. And so, you know, I get home and I tell my mother, you know, Mom, this happened. I just asked her to the prom. She's not talking to me. She didn't say yes or no. And my mother didn't say anything. And she went upstairs and told my grandmother. And she came back down at some point and she said, well, you know, Ma said that, well, maybe the girl just doesn't want to go with Anwar. And so I just left it. And a little while later, through someone else, she expressed that she did want to go. And at that point, I was hesitant because of the way the whole thing went down. And my gut was telling me, you should not go to the prom with this person. And the person she sent to deliver the message talked me into it, basically. And so I ignored my gut, and I went with this person, and it wound up being not so good a time for various reasons. But there are 2 points here. As a man, regardless of what's happening on the outside, you have to listen to your gut. You have to listen to what your inner voice is saying, and you have to listen to that. You have to be true to yourself and listen to that and be at peace with whatever happens going forward. But the second, and probably the most important thing here, was all of this could have been avoided if I had a strong enough spine and a strong enough frame to just approach her in the hallway and say, hey, look, I called you to ask you to go to the prom. Do you want to go or do you not want to go? And then boom, the whole thing would have been finished. That's it. That's taking charge, and that's what a healthy, powerful male will teach a boy. It's important to hear the both sides of stories, and this is important. This is why it's important to know your father and to hear what he has to say, particularly when there's been a divorce, or particularly when the relationship with the mother has dissolved for whatever reason. Most of the time, the children end up with the mother, and so all the children will hear is what the father did wrong. And what you realize as you get older is that there are usually 2 sides to every story. I was an inquisitive child, going back to nature versus nurture. And so I was always asking questions, and I was curious about what had happened between my mother and my father. And both of them had different sides of what happened. But I think that if you only heard my mother's side, and again, you're hearing stories from two people who were married and who were together, and so, emotions are wrapped up in the whole thing. So you kind of have to be like a judge or like King Solomon and kind of piece things together yourself. But if you only hear one side of the story, that's what your reality is and will be. But if you hear both sides of the story, now you just have a more clear picture of what actually happened. And if you listen to most of the men's channels on YouTube in the Negro Manosphere, and if you just talk to men in general, you find that, and you talk to women, you find that the women don't always tell the entire story. I might have lost some listeners there. I might have lost some viewers there, hopefully no subscribers. But for the men and the boys out there, that's often the case. You don't hear the entire thing, and so you don't have a complete understanding of what happened. And I'm not going to say my mother and my father were good or bad. I'm just going to say that it's important to hear both sides of the story, and that's why it's also important to know who your father is and to know what he was going through during those times if your mother and your father aren't together. And I had a lady friend like that who I've lost contact with, and it's important to know when you're meeting someone, going back to my father and horoscopes from the last video, it's important to know how, if you're thinking about dating someone, it's important to know how they grew up. And this particular lady friend told me that her parents split, and she never asked her parents about what happened. To me, that was kind of dangerous, because she may recapitulate what they did. And I think you have to know what happened so that you know not to reproduce it and to continue dysfunction. And lastly, I think it's important to, if it's your father or if it's another male, as boys transitioning into men, it's important to see masculinity through a man's eyes in addition to a woman's eyes. As I described in my essay on A Voice for Men, most of what I heard growing up in the matriarchy I was in was about men providing and men being of service to women. I didn't hear anything about men having standards of their own. I didn't hear anything about men having needs. I didn't hear anything about men establishing order and saying no. And so if you only grow up hearing that your primary role is to provide and to cater and to serve and to be attentive and sympathetic and all these different things, you're going to go out into the world and just do those things, and you won't have an understanding of the other parts of masculinity and maybe what the women want from you. Shout out to Dr. Robert Glover. You have to be able to say no. You have to be able to set boundaries. You have to be able to walk away from relationships in some instances. And you have to know not to get into certain relationships. You have to understand female nature. There are quite a few male content creators have made videos about this, and are making videos about this. And I'm not going to go into it. I don't have the time to go into it. But that was something that was not discussed in the matriarchy that I was raised in. And I don't know if it's that my mother didn't understand why that was important. I don't know if it's my mother saw life through rose-colored glasses, or maybe there were just things that weren't important to share with us. I don't know. But there are things that there are a lot of things you'll only hear from men and from your father and from male mentors. Another important one is conflict resolution. And I'm going to share something really private here with you. When I was staying with my father, I shared in the last video that it was pretty interesting, and there were a lot of things that happened. I moved in when I was 30 years old, and he was around 56. So, to make a long story short, there was something that I did inadvertently involving my stepniece and my stepmom at the time, and as opposed to coming back to me and telling me about it, my stepmother told my father about it. And as opposed to coming to me and talking to me, my father basically verbally attacked me. And it was kind of like an ambush. As soon as he came in the door, he just ripped into me and just tore into me, verbally yelled at me. And I didn't expect it, and I didn't know how to handle it. And it was very emotional. It was very emotional. And I was very hurt by it. And in hindsight, I realized that it was very feminine. And one of the things that hurt the most was that, again, I was the type of guy whereas my father could have come to me and spoke to me and sat me down and just talked to me like a man, without doing that, without going to that extreme. But if you go back to my last video, in the last video I shared with you that beyond a certain age, my father didn't have a male figure himself who he can model and emulate. So he may have only known to express himself like that. Now, living in his house and feeling powerless, the next day I did get on the phone with my brother and I started sobbing myself and saying, this is what happened, Dad did this, Dad did that. He came and he yelled at me. So I responded kind of, in a feminine way myself afterwards. But men should be able to go and talk to each other like men and resolve conflicts with other men and with women. And I'm pretty big on that. If men respond like women to women, bad things tend to happen. And when men respond to other men like that, bad things tend to happen. And this is something else that's been talked about in length on some of the black male channels, in that a lot of the violence we see in the black community comes from boys who were socialized by women who only know how to respond emotionally to conflicts. And that leads to a lot of the violence and the shootings and the murders in the black communities. So that's just something to think about. It's important to see masculinity through male eyes, through the right male eyes. So with that, I'm going to conclude this video. I don't have anything else to say. Once again, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And if you're a young man and if your father's not there, if you grew up without a father and you're still trying to find your way out in the world, try to find other fathers and mentors. That's critical. Try to see the world, if you're raised mostly in a matriarchy, find a positive male who you can model and emulate, and try to see the world, start to see the world through masculine eyes, not just feminine eyes. Try to understand the world in its entirety, the good, the bad, the ugly, and that's the essence of the term red pill. It's okay to be sensitive and caring and aware of your woman's needs, but there are also things that women want, such as, you have to present yourself a certain way. You have to look like you've taken care of yourself. You have to have some kind of sex appeal, some kind of attraction, those kinds of things. So, with that, I'm going to conclude. And I'm going to say that one last thing, since this is Father's Day, one last thing that's being discussed a lot in the in black male spaces on YouTube is the fact that I think 40% of black men don't have children. And at the end of the last video, I did hesitate. If you notice, I hesitated when I gave my Happy Father's Day wish to the fathers out there, because I'm not a father right now. And that stat is not well known, the stat that 40% of black men don't have children. That's a stat that needs to be talked about more, and the reasons why need to be discussed a lot more. And one of my hypotheses is that, is some of the things that I talked about. A lot of boys are being sent out into the world not understanding manhood, not understanding how to be men, not understanding how to properly vet partners, not understanding that they have to have their own purpose when going into relationships, and that they need to be stable financially if they want to start a family, if they want to pass on a legacy. So I think that's where I'm going to end this. That's something that needs to be discussed more. 40% of black men are not fathers, and there needs to be more discussion on that. So with that, I'm going to conclude this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for humoring me. I hope this helps someone. Please share this with someone who you think can benefit. If you're an uncle or a godfather or a mentor in your community and you see a boy/boys who could use the help, please figure out how you can use your wisdom set and knowledge to help that young man or those young men. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Okay, so I'm back, and I didn't think that I'd be back so soon. And I think this might be the first outtake I've ever done for one of my videos. But as I was processing the video and getting it ready to upload to YouTube, there were two more points I wanted to elaborate on. So the first point is about the game of football. And I talked about my uncles and their knowledge of sports, and how because of life's circumstance, me and my brother didn't get exposure to the sport early on. And I didn't know at the time that there were numerous little leagues around the city where our peers were playing and getting hit, giving hits, and they were, tackling and running and catching passes and learning plays and doing all these things that football players do. But the bottom line is that, in my opinion, football players are tough. So even though there's a concern now for head trauma and kids getting injured when they're young, I think that the game teaches boys toughness and strength. So going back to the opening sequence of the movie 300. So the game teaches boys how to be tough, how to compete, how to persevere, and how to be strong, and how to give hits and take hits and do all these different things, how to play in the elements, when it's raining, when it's snowing, when it's hot, all these different things. And toughness and perseverance and strength, I think, are things that even in 2019, men are expected to have and men are expected to show once they get out into the working world and into the adult world, and especially in relationships with women. And it might not be football, it might be martial arts or MMA or something like that, but I think men are expected to show a certain amount of strength, and it's better if you have those qualities versus if you don't. So that's where I was going with the game. And when I was playing basketball, I realized that some of the basketball players who played football, they had that extra level of toughness and fearlessness because they were used to getting hit. They were used to giving hits, and they were used to contact. So the second point I wanted to make is going back to the story I told about how my father lit into me. And so at the end of the first part of this video, I talked about conflict resolution and being able to talk things out and come to resolutions like men. So being able to just kind of sit down and talk with each other without things getting violent or without things completely blowing up. That's particularly important when it comes to male and female relationships as well. I believe that men have to understand that things can go past the point of no return when you're dealing with your lady or a lady, and you have to understand how to, in a safe way and in a healthy way, either de-escalate that situation or remove yourself from that situation. Because most men will tell you who've been in relationships that depending upon the woman you're with, things can keep going and going and going and going and going. And some things may be said that are very hurtful, and before you know it, you're beyond that point where things can be de-escalated, and you might move into that space where things are so crazy that some form of physical contact or abuse might take place. So it's important for men to understand how to de-escalate things with other men, and it's also important to understand that things can continue to escalate with women to the point where something really, really bad happens, and you have to understand how to de-escalate that situation or remove yourself from it. Now, the other thing is, since we're talking about men and women, it's been speculated that another reason that a lot of black men die, young black men die in the black community, is that the men or the boys listen to something a female has said, and they don't ground truth it with the other man, and then they go and confront the other man, not taking into consideration that there's another side to that story, or that their sister or their cousin or their friend or whomever may have exaggerated the situation or may have lied about the situation in the first place. So that's something that men need to know as well. You have to get both sides of the story, and you have to know how to de-escalate certain situations. So with that, now I'm done. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.